Biden shipping millions of barrels of oil overseas while we have an energy crisis here at home. What could possibly be his rationale for this? Because he originally, when he announced that he was going to do this, he touted it as relief for the American people, relief for everyday Americans. And now he's just sending it off to China, Italy, India, the Netherlands. Anyone who wants oil, yeah, sure, take it. What could possibly be his rationale for doing this?
Well, Addison, not a lot of what Joe Biden does makes sense unless he's focused on putting America last instead of putting America first, like President Trump did. That's why our office, we filed the HR 7996, which is, and wait for it, this is a mouthful, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve Anti-Exploitation Act. And what that would do is to say, if the Strategic Reserve, Petroleum Reserve was going to be tapped at all, an act of Congress would be required, because that was all set up to begin with. And by the way, under President Trump at its peak, it had 695 million barrels. Today, we're just under 498 million. So it's about a 28% reduction. And what that was intended for, if there is a national emergency or an act of God, not for political expediency like Joe Biden wants to do.
Yeah, we have reserves for a reason in case we need them. It's like a savings account. You put money in your savings account, and when in the event that you do need it or you have an emergency fund set up, that's when you take the money. You don't take the money and then go give it to someone, in another country. You don't Venmo so-and-so over in the Netherlands or in Italy. You use that for yourself. Biden should be using that oil for the American people. But, you do make a good point. Biden has been putting America last in everything that he's done. Every policy he has enacted and every policy that he has called for has not been in the best interest of Americans. It's, in fact, in many cases, has been in the worst interest of Americans. And we also see that with the southern border. And I want to touch on that as well, Congressman, because you are in Texas. Several counties are declaring an invasion down at the southern border. And I think it's safe to call it that. I mean, over a quarter million migrants crossed over in May, 1.5 million since fiscal year 2022 began, and dozens of people are dying. I mean, it seems like daily and weekly, people are being pulled out of the Rio Grande River. They're being found in these tractor trailers, like the story in San Antonio. It's just terrible. If that's not an invasion, I don't know what is.
No, it is an invasion. So we have to call it for what it is and let the American people know the truth, because the mainstream media is not covering this. It's worse now than it ever has been. Since Joe Biden took office, Addison, 2.9 million people have crossed the border illegally, 700,000 known gotaways, which means that there's a total of 3.6 million, which is more than we have in 22 United States. As you mentioned, in April, it was the worst month we'd ever had, 234,000 illegal border crossings. That's in our history, but that was beaten in May when the numbers came out, and it was just under 240,000 illegal migrants crossing the border. So it is an invasion, and the drug cartels are making wild profits. We've seized over 1 million pounds of narcotics just on the southern border since Joe Biden took office, and 7,000 pounds of fentanyl just in FY22, which is enough to kill every American 10 times over. So it is an invasion. It is chaos. And to have Secretary Mayorkas, the Homeland Security Secretary, say that the border is under control and secure is an absolute dereliction of duty.
Yeah, I completely agree. And we have heard the lies coming from the White House, from Karine Jean-Pierre, when, for example, when that tractor trailer of those some 50 migrants who were dead inside, when that was found, the White House's line to that was, that happened because the border's actually closed, not because the border is open, and human smuggling is a very popular trade now under President Biden, a very lucrative trade under President Biden. That was their line, is that the border is closed. Alejandro Mayorkas, he said everything's fine, everything's under control, there's no crisis, nothing to see here. In other words, they're telling us not to believe our lying eyes. And now I have this here from the Washington Times. It says the Department of Homeland Security issued a terror alert on Tuesday, warning that anger over the chaotic U.S.-Mexico border or a Supreme Court decision on abortion rights could lead to more mass violence. This was back in June. You see how they were trying to set this up, because obviously with the Roe v. Wade decision being overturned, the department knew that there was going to be mass violence and there was going to be terror threats, and there have been, from pro-aborts. And so they decided to jumble in people who are upset about the crisis at our southern border and say, yeah, you know, there's going to be shootings. Maybe it's going to be from people upset about Roe, but maybe it's going to be, you know, those terrorist conservatives who are mad about the open border.
You know, it's just absolutely absurd and it's ridiculous. I mean, I questioned in the Oversight Committee Dr. Gupta, who's the National Policy Director for drug policy for Biden. And I asked him directly, you know, citing all of those statistics I just shared with you, that if in his view the border's secure, and he said yes. And I said, you know, you're not living on this planet, you're living in orbit around Neptune, because these folks, again, if you are the most sacrosanct duty we have as elected officials is to keep our constituents safe. Mm-hmm. And Joe Biden has absolutely, you know, failed miserably on that front when you have the border the worst that it ever has been. And under President Trump, he turned that flood into a trickle. But then Joe Biden took that tap and turned it back into a flood.
Just listen to this quote, Congressman. Some domestic violent extremists have expressed grievances related to their perception that the U.S. government is unwilling or unable to secure the U.S.-Mexico border. So right there, baselessly, they're calling people who are upset over this feckless handling of the border domestic violent extremists, because we want to know, because of the violent extremism that's happening at the border, because we're pointing that out, we're being called violent extremists. It is baffling to the mind how far this administration will go to peddle propaganda. I mean, Kim Jong-un is pulling out his notepads and writing down the names of Karine Jean-Pierre, of Alejandro Mayorkas, of Kamala Harris, of Joe Biden, of Brian Deese, you name it. He's very jealous of them. He's probably going to recruit them for some classes to teach his army and his ilk how to peddle propaganda this impressive. You are a violent extremist if you're upset about violence down at the southern border. The propaganda here is just asinine. Congressman, with that, we are totally out of time. I appreciate you joining the show today. Thank you.
Thanks, Addison. God bless.
Coming up next, another individual has passed away after the Highland Park